The Las Vegas Raiders have entered the head coaching search with what might be the least appealing job on the market. We got all that and much more for you on today's episode of the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
What's going on, football fans, and welcome into another episode of the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. We are your hosts, Matt Williamson, former NFL scout, myself, Ross Jackson, NFL expert here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And on today's episode of the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, of course, I'm standing in for Brian Peacock. We're going to dive into why we don't believe you, Miami. You could say it all you want. Matt and I do not believe that you have patched things up with Tyreek Hill. We'll take a look at that and answer one of our listener questions about who could potentially land Tyreek Hill this offseason. Matt will also dive into next steps for the Dallas Cowboys because things feel a little murky in those waters in Dallas right now. And we're going to kick everything off with the Las Vegas Raiders, who fired Antonio Pierce and now might have one of the least appealing jobs open for a future head coach. We're going to get into all of that on today's episode. We thank you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Just head over to FanDuel.com today for your chance to get $250 in bonus bets by winning your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com to get started. Matt, we were saying yesterday, we were surprised that there were only a few head coaching jobs open. And right after that, we get a new one. The Las Vegas Raiders into the chat as the sixth job open, moving on from Antonio Pierce. Let's start off with just the move itself.
I got to interrupt you. I apologize. I apologize. I get something off my chest, Ross.
Yes, do it.
So I've really enjoyed doing these shows with you. You're a great relief pitcher, and this week has been fun. But you caused me some anxiety, and I just need to come clean and get ahead of it. So the old timers will remember that one of my co-hosts at ESPN, when nobody had podcasts, was Ross Tucker. And I have been afraid all week that I'm going to call you Ross Tucker at some point. It's been a long time since Ross and I did a show every day, but I'm just getting ahead of it now because if it slips out of my mouth, I just want to come clean before him.
I was ready for it. I thought I said something wrong. I thought I did something wrong. I love that. That's so funny. Well, look,
first name. It's been in my brain all week. Like, don't call him Ross Tucker. Don't call him Ross Tucker.
Say it now. That way, if it happens later, you've already addressed it. You've already said it. Monday. I love it. I love it. Well, I'll tell you what. If there's anybody I'm going to be mistaken for, I'll take Ross Tucker. That's totally fine.
It's the funniest story. I mean, we back in the ESPN days, I'll only take a second. They asked Ross, are you interested in being a co-host on the Football Today podcast with Matt Williamson? And his response was, Matt's great. I'd love to work with him, but what's a podcast? Now he's got like this conglomerate.
He's got this whole thing. Look at him go.
Right.
I love it. That's
work,
awesome.
Yep.
Shout out to Ross Tucker for sure.
But anyway, let's talk Raiders.
So was this move surprising to you at all? That moving on from Antonio Pierce? Yeah,
I'll be honest, and people might remember what was surprising to me is that they kept him after the interim tag, to be honest, because I know the Raiders had some momentum at the time and the players loved him. And I think he's going to be a good coach. But if you look at his resume pre-Raiders head coaching, he's only been a football coach for like 3 or 4 years. I mean, there's just not much experience to say, boom, you're a head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. And I think he was a little in over his head, but it's a tough job. I don't think ownership is super helpful. I always go back to that. I'm super interested, and maybe we'll never know, what kind of influence does Brady have on the new hire or the new quarterback or football stuff in general, or is he just a silent partner? I don't know the answer to that. But you mentioned it. It's not the most appealing job. You got Herbert and Mahomes in your division, and they're not going anywhere.
Yep.
You got Reed, Peyton, and Harbaugh in your division. Chances of you being the third, second, first best coach is a ways away.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a particularly talented roster. And going back to quarterback, I know we're going to have a lot of quarterback conversations coming up here. When you start doing the musical chairs of who are going to be the third, I didn't care what team. I urge our listeners, who are the 32 starting quarterbacks in the league next year? You'll probably come up with like 28 or 29 names.
Yeah.
And the Raiders seem like one of those teams that could be, left with nobody in their musical chair.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. It's not a very appealing situation in terms of it's already set up. The thing that is appealing, I think, is $107 million under the salary cap. So a lot of money to spend going in. Very helpful. But this free agency class of quarterbacks isn't necessarily life-saving for any team. I mean, the biggest name that's going to be up there is going to be Sam Darnold, and he might not even get out of Minnesota, depending upon how they handle him. And so I struggle to look at the Raiders and say, okay, how is it that they build out of this? Now, the good news for any head coach is that head coaches don't take jobs for just 1 year, right?
True.
Jobs for a long time. So what's the long-term potential outlook for them? But if you look back at that, typically in order to figure that out, you try to look back at the history, right? Is it stable? All these other things. They've gone from John Gruden to, to Josh McDaniels to now Antonio Pearson. These guys all moved on from all pretty close to one another. Not the most confidence I think you can build as an organization saying, hey, here's a place where we'll be patient with you.
You might have to rent a house and not buy in Vegas.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
right.
And if I was taking this job, which sometimes you don't have the choice. I mean, you're just happy to be one of the 32 head coaches on the planet.
Hello, Dave Canales. Yep.
Exactly. And there's been a lot of those that I would love to be like, maybe our best move, guys, is give me the Andy Dalton type for this year and draft our guy next year. And let's just draft linemen and invest in linemen and build I always talk about the nest, let's build a nest for the incoming rookie quarterback. But this might be nest building season. And then next year is, the egg comes.
Yeah, it's very similar to how I feel about the New Orleans Saints, right? Like rebuild everything around. And this is what the Giants have tried to do for a while. They tried to build the car around the driver and then plug the driver in. They just picked the wrong driver for what it is that they were trying to do. But you have the time to do this. And next year's quarterback class, at least as of right now, considering the people that have chosen to go back to school, I mean, a Drew Aller out of Penn State and some of these other guys that have chosen to go back to school, it's going to be a pretty good dang quarterback class in 2026.
Looks like it. Looks better
than 2025. Yeah, exactly. And so if you have an opportunity to invest in what's around that position and then maybe draft that future guy on a rookie contract, which allows you to maximize those funds as the salary cap ticks up every year, it's not a bad way to go, but you got to find the right person to construct that, or you find the stopgap coach that does that, then you sell the product that they help you build to somebody else in a couple of years.
Real quick, you mentioned Drew Aller, and it's not that because I'm in PA, I have these great Penn State connections. I know a ton of people that went to Penn State, and I'm not trying to break news, but a couple birdies have kind of mentioned that even though he said he's going back, if they win another game or two, he might be like, I'm going. I mean, and he may go really early in this class. Yeah.
My fingers are crossed, and my fingers would be crossed that he gets no further down than number 9 overall to the New Orleans Saints, because he's my favorite. He would immediately become my favorite quarterback in this draft class.
And I'll tell the Raiders are thinking the same thing.
I'm sure.
Yeah,
and I'll tell you what.
Drew, you should come out.
Yeah, right. And I know Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez over at Locked NFL Draft, they've said the same thing too.
Oh, really?
So yeah. So that's a big
interesting nugget
narrative and nugget out there right now. So definitely one to keep an eye out on. Another thing to keep an eye out on, of course,
could he go first overall?
I've thought about that.
Okay.
I've thought about that. I've been curious about that too. I mean, you got the Tennessee Titans,
Yeah.
Do they have the system to support a Shedeur Sanders to maximize a Cam Ward, or do you go with the guy that's the sure thing pocket passer? I don't know. He very well could. Very well could.
I need to do more homework on all those guys, but yeah.
Joe Burrow type, right? Just all of a sudden skyrocket up out of the last season before you come out. So we'll see. We'll see which way it goes. The other thing that we're going to be watching out for is going to be the Dallas Cowboys. Matt, what's going to happen? They're declining interviews across the division for Mike McCarthy, which is objectively hilarious. But are they going to stick with him? If they don't, where do they go? We're going to dive into all of that next. Take a look at the Dallas Cowboys as we continue on with today's episode of the Peacock Williamson NFL Show, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of the Peacock Williamson NFL Show brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And they're America's #1 sportsbook for a reason, because they have an expansive catalog of a bunch of different things that you can do, all the way from same game parlays to just regular picks against the spread, money lines, player props, and live betting. I like the drive bets personally. You're watching the game, you kind of get a feel of how the flow of the game is going, and you're betting this drive's going to end in a punt, this one's going to end in a field goal and a touchdown or something else. It's fun. I really, really enjoy it. Makes the game a lot of fun, even if you don't have a rooting interest or a vested interest in any of those playoff teams, but you just love some NFL action. FanDuel helps to spice it up for you. So go and check them out today at FanDuel.com. If you're a new customer, it's a great time to get started. If you put down your first bet of $5 and win that bet, you're going to get $250 in bonus bets that you can use on all the things that we just discussed as well. So go and check them out today over at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, everybody, continuing on with the Peacock Williamson NFL Show. Thanks a ton for being here with us. Matt, I want to go to one of the listener questions that we got today from Parker, who wants to know if the Dallas Cowboys do end up moving on from Mike McCarthy, what do they do next? I think we should set the table a little bit before we dive into the question as a whole. So what's going on with Mike McCarthy is that his contract expires on the 14th of January. Up until then, effectively, the Cowboys have exclusive negotiating rights. Now, the Chicago Bears across the division tried to request an interview, and the Dallas Cowboys said, no, none of that. We're not playing that. So there's clearly some interest, Matt, in negotiating with them, but could potentially lead to a split. If that were to happen, it feels like Dallas wouldn't have too much trouble landing a top option at head coach, if you ask me. What do you think?
I would assume they pay well. You know, I mean, that we never talk about contracts for coaches.
Yeah, good point.
Some teams pay better than others. But it's also like being the center fielder of the Yankees. You know, like if you're not Mickey Mantle or Joe DiMaggio, you're not good enough. You know, like Dak Prescott isn't Roger Staubach or Troy Aikman, so he's not good enough. You know, like it's quite the microscope.
Too much history.
Yeah. Do you watch the show Landman by chance?
Yeah.
Okay. Jerry Jones was just on it. I don't know if you saw the most recent one that was 2 nights ago. And I thought he had a phenomenal scene. But I've heard some people talking about it, and I was actually just talking to Marcus Mosher. We did Locked On Dynasty. He's the Cowboy guy, of course. And he said, and several people have said this that I've heard, that really that's not even a scripted scene by Jones, that he very much believes he just wants to work with his family. He bought the Cowboys so he can work with his family. He's up in age. He wants to work with people he likes. I mean, like he is not going to hire Jimmy Johnson if he hates him, or you know what I mean, just to win. I think that that's true. I mean, that Al Davis late in life was a little do whatever the heck you want, you know. I mean, eccentric, you know, elderly, whatever. But I think he's going to hire people he wants to work with every day, whether that's his son and daughter or whoever. And I get the impression he's pretty comfortable with McCarthy.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, so I won't reveal it, but Marcus threw out a couple names that if they were to replace him are frightening. You know, they're just like his buddies or former players that don't really have coaching history. And I'm like, ooh.
Deion Sanders, anybody?
Along those lines, something like that. Another prominent player that's a high school coach at the moment. But anyway.
Yes, okay.
I tend to think that that's the last shoe to drop of any potential head coaching changes.
Yeah, agreed.
Unless a McVay retires or everyone always talks about Tomlin's getting traded. I mean, I can't imagine any of these playoff guys moving. But anyway, I think he goes back. I think you give him – his contract is up. That rarely happens in the coaching world. Probably give him a 2-year deal. And if this year is crappy, he gets paid the year after and you go get someone else. But I bet they run it back.
Yeah. It's what makes the most sense, I feel like, too. I think that's the situation there. Like their situation in Dallas is not a dire one. I know they just had a rough season. I get it. But like to say that team's devoid of talent would just be short-sighted. To say that team played to its identity and finished the way that it did, I think would be short-sighted. I was low on Dallas coming into the season, but they're still a talented team. I think that there's enough for you to build around there with another draft class. Go out there and grab Ashton Ginty early on in the draft if you can, or something like that. Like add some type of game-breaking talent, continue to rebuild the offensive line. Certainly the defense needs some help, but you've got superstars all over that team. Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, believe it or not, considered a superstar. Like, I mean,
all of whom missed pretty good chunks of time.
Right.
All three of those guys,
right. Dealt with a lot of injury and everything. Like, it's just one of those situations where it does not feel like they're so far away from their identity that they need to go and change it. Does that make sense?
Again, I would say, give me one more year and hopefully we better. Like Parsons came back and was awesome. Lamb was great and Rush wasn't terrible, but give me a whole year of Dak and let me try this thing. And one thing I do give the Cowboys credit for, they're one of the best drafting teams in the league. I mean, they do
year in and
a
year
nice
out.
Job. Yep. Give me one more off season to see what I can do.
Yeah. That Marshawn Nealon addition this offseason, by the, as example, like outstanding, it's just really, really good stuff. And I'll tell you what, it's great for the other 6 teams that have head coaching jobs open that the Dallas Cowboys don't go to the market because they could quickly become one of the most appealing. Leave alone the idea that Jerry Jones might hire somebody or whatever. But we talked yesterday, Matt, about the cachet that comes with being the New York Jets, the cachet that comes with being the New York Giants. And no one gets that like the Dallas Cowboys.
Right. And I'm sure that, Texas is so rich for high school football. I imagine all the coaches that grew up a Cowboy fan and be like,
yep,
I'll do anything to the Cowboys head coach. You know what I mean? Come on.
I don't care what their record was the season before. I don't
Friday
care
Night
what.
Lights. Let's go.
I dare say, I'll say it this way. I dare say there's some Pennsylvania area high school head coaches that grew up Eagles fans that would take a Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, come on now.
The Yankee center fielder. I mean, that's a big deal.
That's huge. So looking at kind of their situation, we talked about how they do draft well. We talk about how, if that they're likely to stick with McCarthy, all those other things. Where would you most immediately look at? Let's say they do stick with McCarthy. Where would you most immediately look at when it comes to Dallas to say, okay, let's improve that. Let's fix it. Kind of like what we talked about with fixing the defense over in Indianapolis. Where would be your first sort of point of order as a returning Mike McCarthy?
It wouldn't be GT. I know every mock on the planet is going to have him go there because I've done mocks. Everyone's done mocks. You want this guy to go high in your mock because he's awesome. Yeah, but sure. I don't think Zach Martin's going to come back. I'm just kind of guessing. I mean, I could see this being the end for him. He had an injury-plagued year, wasn't himself. Yeah. And one thing I give them credit for, they drafted 2 this year. They use high picks on offensive linemen. Tyron Smith, Zach Martin. I wouldn't be shocked if they take the best guard in the draft or, another defensive tackle. I mean, the one pick that they have missed is the nose tackle out of
Mozzie Smith.
Yeah. I mean, it might have to. I would think big people was the priority. And I know we're going to talk receivers here in the second or the third segment, but Brandon Cooks is up. You traded for Mingo. But I would like a compliment to Lamb too. Yeah, I mean, in terms of skill guys,
a Luther Burden
second round pick, or or a first round pick, right?
Yeah, all right, great.
Receiver,
yeah, that makes sense, right? Built from the trenches, Dallas. It's an old school approach. It's the way to go. It's not old school. It's tried and true, right? Big difference between those two. All right, let's take a look at those receivers actually, because Matt and I want to make a statement that we don't believe you, Miami, when you say that you've patched up your relationship with Tyreek Hill. Let's discuss why. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of the Peacock Williamson NFL Show, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of the Peacock Williamson NFL Show brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. Listen, I retired from fantasy a couple years ago. I couldn't handle the injuries and navigating rosters and the one person that's in every league that sends bad trade requests. That might or might not have been me. Who knows? It doesn't matter. I just didn't like it anymore. So the thing that I wanted to switch over to was daily fantasy. But then I got a little uncomfortable with that too. Me versus a bunch of mystery lineups. And I'm just supposed to believe that I lost and I don't win any of that small slice of this big amount of money. That's why I made my switch over to Prize Picks. Prize Picks is super easy. They give you projections for players that are playing. You choose more or less. 2 to 6 of those players, you get those right, you can win up to 1,000 times your money back. And with quick withdrawals, you can get that money back quickly as well. So go and check out Prize Picks today. It's absolutely awesome. All you got to do is download the Prize Picks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You're going to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's what you got over at Prize Picks. Run your game. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends over at Rocket Money. I've been singing Rocket Money's praises. I started using Rocket Money a couple months ago, because I wanted to whittle out some of those old subscriptions that I had subscribed to and then forgot about. And I was super prideful. I said that I wouldn't have that. Well, they ended up saving me quite a bit of money monthly, right? Because these are coming out every month. Saved me quite a bit of money monthly, and even saved me on a couple of annual subscriptions as well. And one of the other things that I really love about Rocket Money is the fact that they help you reach your financial goals faster. And I like their goals feature. You set goals, they end up putting some money off to the side for you, so you don't have to worry about all the monthly budgeting and all that other stuff. So between saving money on my monthly subscriptions that I forgot about, and also saving money by having that money put aside for me by Rocket Money automatically, it just makes me reaching my financial goals a lot easier. So do the same. Go out there, get rid of your unwanted subscriptions, reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money today. All you got to do is head over to rocketmoney.com/lockedon to get started. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, everybody, we're wrapping up today's episode of the Peacock Williamson NFL Show. Matt Williamson, former NFL scout, myself, Ross Jackson, NFL expert here on the Locked On Podcast Network with you. Thank you very much for making us your first listen and for being with us today. Matt, we spoke yesterday about Tyreek Hill, right? Changing his profile picture, Antonio Brown throwing up the deuces as he runs off the field shirtless. One of the craziest things, by the way. This situation is so baffling. We didn't even talk about how crazy that situation was.
Right. I had some stories about AB too that I won't share on the air, but
yeah. Well, we'll talk. No, I think that like you look at this whole situation with Tyreek Hill saying that, he's looking, he's 1 foot out the door. He's ready to go. All these other things. When all of a sudden there's reports saying that the Miami Dolphins and Tyreek Hill have patched things up. And Matt, I don't believe them.
Me neither.
I don't believe them. I think the phrasing of the report didn't help, right? The phrasing of the report said, or one of the reports said that they've patched things up and Tyreek Hill won't ask for or won't demand a trade. To me, you cannot ask for and not demand a trade all you want. The moment that you tell everybody publicly you don't want to be a part of my team, I will still trade you. And so both things to me can be true.
No doubt. And they have money invested in Waddle. I think Malik Washington's a guy they like. They actually got a lot of output from a tight end for the first time ever in Jonnu Smith.
Right.
You can always get another receiver in the draft. They have a lot of money invested in that receiver room now. Is that where you want to allocate your money? They could use more linemen, et cetera. I think he's not going to be a Dolphin. I really do. Mm-hmm. And I actually think that they discussed trading him going into last year too. People called and I think he's going to be on the move and he can say we patch things up or not. That doesn't mean they want him back either. He's kind of a pain in the butt too. And he's, I think he's still a great player, but I don't think he's the cheetah anymore, where he's the best player or, an elite player. He's not going to be a top 10 guy, regardless of position. So yeah, I could definitely see that moving. And knowing that we're going to talk about this, I whipped together a list of big name receivers that could be on the move this year. So
please, let's dive into that.
All right. So we know T. Higgins is the free agent, of course.
Yeah, right.
Godwin's also a free agent, and I think he'll be hard to retain. I think Devontae Adams, Deebo Samuel, those guys could get cut because of their contract situation.
Yep.
Deontay Johnson's up. I don't think he's super desirable, but Keenan Allen is up. Amari Cooper. Diggs is up. Brandon Cooks, that's not a huge one. I think Lockett gets cut. I think Christian Kirk gets cut. Wow. We were talking about Locked On Dynasty. We think Pittman has a really good chance to get traded.
Sure.
I think Cooper Kupp could get traded. And I think Adam Thielen could be on the move. That's a dozen names, something like that, of maybe aging, but quality wide receivers. And going back to A.J. Brown and Tyreek Hill and Diggs to the Bills, big name receivers move.
Yep, this is a thing that happens, and we could see Tyreek Hill move. Right, he was one of the guys that did move. Right, we've seen it once before, and look, we've watched Brandon Cooks move several times for first round picks. Like we've seen that dude traded all over the place since he started
weirdest career ever
in New Orleans. Very strange, very strange, very.
It's
Josh
not like people
Johnson
didn't want him, right?
Yeah,
and first round pick for him.
Yeah, and to your point about Tyreek Hill, if the Dolphins were getting those phone calls, that means two things. It means they were listening, but it also means that there's interest out there, right? And so Garad had asked, and forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong, but Garad had asked about Tyreek Hill and where he could potentially land and who has the cap space for him. He's not that expensive. I think he moves for only $2 million for whoever the acquiring team is. So most teams could land him. But here's the thing. You just rattled off like 12 different players. That's a saturated wide receiver market. And that's before we even get to the draft wide receivers, Tetaroa McMillan, Luther Burden, these guys that are going to be at the top of that conversation. So
there's always going to be a wealth of them coming into the league. Always.
Yeah.
Right.
So it means anybody could land anybody in this situation, right? Like it oversaturates the market, which potentially brings some of the prices what the price is for Tyreek Hill, but for some of these other guys brings the price down. Yeah,
and I was kind of going there that I don't think for these teams trying to trade someone or the trade market, not the free agent market, because Higgins is going to make a ton.
Yeah,
but I don't think you're going to have to give up a super high. You might get them for cheaper than our listeners think. A Hill or a Cup or somebody like that. I mean, they're up in age. The other guys on their team that are stepping up that are young. I don't think they'll be as crazy expensive as you think.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think you're going to hear something like, oh, the Miami Dolphins are asking for a first round pick, but they're going to get a third and a sixth next year or something like that. Like it's going to be that kind of a thing to where, you're going to, and then they're going to walk away going, well, we got first round pick value, which is really what we wanted. That's one of my favorites all the time. Like that's how you know who lost the trade every time. Well, we got the value that we wanted. We didn't get the pick, but we got the value. And so I could absolutely see something like that happening to where, he gets moved for a couple of draft picks and then some other team has, Tyreek Hill for a year, and then maybe you get a really solid Tyreek Hill before he starts to get restless in one place, and then maybe they move him. You know what I mean? There's just a lot of different things they can do here.
It kind of reminds me actually of Diggs leaving Buffalo a year ago.
Right? Yep.
I think that was a second round pick, and maybe Buffalo got some change back or something like that, and maybe even get him cheaper than that because he has some off the field things. Tyreek. So who knows? I don't think it'll be crazy expensive. And I love your point about we got first round value. Well, 32 6-round picks doesn't equal a first round pick.
Yeah. You're not going to draft the number one overall prospect with, all those 6-round picks. You're going to need that number one overall selection.
Yeah.
If you want
enough nickels and dimes turns into $1, but enough 6-round picks don't turn into a first round.
I love that. It's one of my favorite things. Oh goodness. So with a potentially busy wide receiver market this offseason, does it make sense that Higgins maybe becomes the first domino to fall in free agency, or could we potentially see some of the trades happen even before then?
I'll have to think about the timeline, but I bet there's some trades that could happen before that.
Makes sense, right? For a couple of guys that are still under contract.
Right. I think like Debo and Adams will get cut, soon here, so they can get ready for free agency and you get those contracts off the books. Like when the Jets traded for Adams, they knew it was a 1-year rental.
Yeah.
I still think there's a chance Higgins returns to Cincinnati, though. I think it's unlikely, but I think there's a chance. You look at the Eagles, they're paying a quarterback and 2 receivers. You can do it, but the problem is the Bengals need 7 new starters on defense. The Eagles don't. I just look at the Chargers and Patriots and say Higgins would fit in so well with either one of those teams. And they have the most cap space in the league.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you too, that there's a chance I can see Higgins going back. And I'll tell you what, I think one of the biggest things is who they land as who the Cincinnati Bengals land as their new defensive coordinator. You land the right defensive coordinator that excites everybody, helps you rebuild that defense. There wasn't much wrong with the Cincinnati offense. The issues was that the defense was historically bad. And so in that situation, I could see Higgins saying, you know what? This offense works. The defense is about to get better. I'm comfortable here. I know the offense here. I know the quarterback here. I'll stick around again.
Yeah. Maybe. Maybe.
So we can see. And I'll tell you what, that's exactly where we're going to lead off tomorrow's episode, is that Cincinnati defensive coordinator spot and the other coordinator spots that have been open. It's easy to focus on the head coaches and general managers, but I'll tell you what, when it comes to the play callers, play designers, play architects, play drawers, all that kind of stuff, these coordinator openings are huge as well. So we're going to dive into each and every one of those with a heavy focus on Cincinnati with Lou Anarumo out in Cincinnati. We're also going to dive into next year's Sam Darnold, a great question from Brian, and I'm going to give you my thoughts and get Matt's thoughts on Alvin Kamara and Derek Carr's futures in New Orleans. Thanks to a great question from Michael. So, Matt, we got a lot on the schedule for tomorrow's episode. Going to be fun.
Yeah, dig in. I'm excited. Good stuff.
Let's dive in. I appreciate you. We're going to dive into all of that in tomorrow's episode. Make sure you come back because we'll be here for you. And we appreciate you very much for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show. For Matt Williamson, I am Ross Jackson. We'll see you again here tomorrow on the Peacock Williamson NFL Show, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.